Okay. Good morning, everyone. Please sign into the attendance. All right. Good morning, everyone. Please sign into the attendance when you can. Starting in about a minute. Okay. All right. We will start in 30 seconds. Please sign into the attendance. Okay. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Any questions before we get started? Nothing? Okay. I'd like to ask a few questions to help recap our lesson from last week on injunctions. If you recall, in our last class, we discussed the context of nuisances. And I think one of the bigger points of confusion in the minute polls was, when do you have injunction versus when do you have damages? And this is an important line that I think you should all be able to draw. All right, so let's try on the class notes, which I will put a link to in the chat over here. Let's try question number 1. It's a short answer. And let's see if you can all get this one right. Okay, here's the answer to question number 1. What kind of remedy compensates a plaintiff for past injuries caused by a nuisance? Keyword there is past. What kind of remedy compensates a plaintiff for past injuries caused by a nuisance? Okay, another 10 seconds. Okay. All right. Who's next? Please raise your hand.
I am, Professor.
Oh, Natalie, thank you. Okay. Natalie, what did you put here?
I put temporary damages.
Temporary damages. Why temporary damages?
Because they cover past losses when someone experienced an injury or a company experienced an injury.
Okay, that's exactly right. The answer here is temporary damages. I'm looking at the answers in the poll. A lot of people just put damages. That's not wrong, but it's not precise enough. On an exam or even on the bar or whatever you want to put it, you need to be more specific because there are different types of damages. The answer here is temporary damages. A lot of people write DAS for damages. I don't know where that came from. It's like DAS. I would DMG, whatever. I know what you mean. But the answer is temporary damages. I think less than half of you put. Most people just put damages. A couple people put injunction. Injunction is not correct here. That's not the correct answer. When we're talking about past damages, I know in contracts, I'm asking where did DAS come from? So I don't know where it came from. It's such a strange shortening. But the answer here is temporary damages. Injunctions are only useful. Oh, I gave away the next one, didn't I? Okay, well, maybe not. Let's do question number 2. I told myself, don't do it, Josh, don't do it, and I did it. So question number 2, also short answer. What kind of remedy or remedies would compensate or compensates a plaintiff for future injuries that a nuisance will continue to cause? What kind of remedy or remedies would compensate a plaintiff for future injuries that nuisances will continue to cause. Okay, and Amir, I'll call on you about 10 seconds. All right, Amir, what do you think over here? What's your answer?
I put permanent damages and an injunction.
Okay, you got both of them. Good. Why is it both permanent damages and injunctions?
Well, for injunctions, it can be temporary or permanent.
Good.
To make to stop someone, and for permanent damages is because the owner only gets like a one-time payment, and then you base it off like how the value of the property diminished over time.
Good. That's exactly right. So the answer here, to be precise, is injunction and permanent damages. A lot of people just put injunction. I don't think that's a correct answer. It's partially correct, but I think that what the Boomer case suggests, and Boomer is the the sort of modern trend, which I think is probably the rule everywhere now. You can compensate in two different ways. You can compensate through an injunction, and you can compensate through permanent damages. And just want to explain how this works. Let's say that having, the factory next door to your house decreases the value of your house by $100,000. And we can calculate that with some accuracy. Rather than shutting down a multi-million-dollar plant and putting all these people out of a job, the court may decide to simply award permanent damages. What that would mean is that you simply compensate the owner for what he lost. So you would pay permanent damages of $100,000, and then he can't complain anymore because he's recovered all that he lost. Now, is it actually recovering all they lost? He had, peace. He had quiet. He doesn't want to live next to a factory, but that's something that courts now do. Chance, go ahead.
Yes, sir. The idea of compensation with regards to permanent damages. On the previous class, one of the questions was, the answer was, will you be fully compensated with permanent damages? I think you put false.
Yeah.
Is that something we need to address, that fully compensated versus compensated?
Yeah, I think I framed that question quite deliberately. In some cases, damages may not fully compensate. Yeah. But I'm asking in general, what kind of remedies can compensate a person? So I think there is an important difference in the framing of the question. Does that make sense, Chance?
Yes, and just to be clear, we are going to, on the exam, we need to make sure we specify compensate versus fully compensate. Right?
Well, look, I think you have to look at it this way. Boomer held that there are two different types of ways of compensating future injuries, right? There are two approaches. You can give an injunction. You can give damages, or maybe a combination of both. And I think what the question here is asking is, what are the remedies that would compensate, sort of like hypothetically speaking. But I think in the last class, it's hard to say with 100% certainty that an injunction or damage would compensate all the way, which is why I think I framed this question a little bit differently.
Okay, I got you. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
No, my pleasure. It's a good question. Go ahead. I'll lower your hand. Okay. I was Googling, there's a new Logitech mouse that's built-in zoom buttons. You can basically program the buttons on your mouse to raise your hand, to lower your hand. It's almost like a gaming app, right? You can so that might be actually useful for the future. Take yourself off mute, the things you have to do very quickly. All right. Any questions to those first two? All right, again, so with a nuisance question, and I do tend to test this on a fairly regular basis, I'm less concerned in what you learned in torts about whether it's an unreasonable usage. All that stuff just doesn't really matter here for this class. What I think the cases from this class want you to take away is, how do you figure out the method of compensation? Injunction versus damages, permanent or temporary. And try to use the precise terminology. It's not wrong to say damages, just it's not fully correct because there are different kinds of damages. Diana, go ahead.
Just to be clear, is it injunction and permanent damages, or can it be, or just one or the other?
It's and or, if you want to be precise. In some cases, this is sort of Chase's question before, but I would say it's both. Those are the remedies that are available, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You know, I think I'll tweak the question for next year to what kind of remedies are available. Yeah, Chase, that make it a little bit better. This is why I don't like giving short answer exams, short answer or multiple choice on an exam, because no matter how hard I think about it, I can never get the wording just right, because I think there are always going to be very smart students who sort of like tweak my question a little bit and see things I don't see. So I think I'll tweak this for next year. So the current 1Ls will benefit from your wisdom. May they actually ever see me in person? Who the hell knows? You know, might see 3 years of law school on Zoom. Okay. Questions in that one? All right, let's try to bridge to next class. And it's not deliberate, but we're doing another torts concept, which is trespass. Maybe doing crim as well. So here's, question number 3. Ooh, I'm sorry, I did the short answer. I started again. Question number 3. Can a person pay to trespass onto someone else's land? Can a person pay to trespass on another person's land? And this is going to be, let's see, it'll be Nikki in about 5 seconds. I think I just bet everyone. Nikki, what do you think here? Yep, go ahead, Nikki, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Presley. I saw Nick and just I had a brain slip. I'm sorry. Presley, go ahead.
You're fine. I said false.
Okay, why do you say false?
Because if you're paying someone to come on a land, you're not really trespassing. You're being given permission. Exactly
right. The answer is false. This one was close. 58-42. This one was pretty close. But Presley was... I'm sorry, Nikki. I apologize. I saw NIC and I was like, okay, that's next. The answer here is false. That's right. And here, I think the wording of the question really makes a difference. You learned in torts that a trespass is when you enter someone else's property without permission, right? It's unauthorized, right? You're not allowed to do it. You can seek damages for trespass. It's also a criminal offense. You have a person arrested for trespass. But there are many circumstances in which people come on your property and they're not arrested. You can invite someone. I'm sure you discussed this in torts, the invitee, right? If you have a guest and you say, come on my property, they're allowed to. And they're allowed to stay there, really, until you say, okay, get lost. And then they have to leave. You can also have what's called a license, which we'll get to later in class. Usually a license is oral. It says, hey, come on Blackacre, come on my property, and you can do some stuff. For example, a plumber, right? Or electrician, or a chef, whatever it is, right? You say, I'm inviting you onto my land for some limited purpose, and I can kick you out whenever I want. A license may be more than that, though. Maybe you ask your neighbor, hey, would you mind if I, walk across your yard to the main road because it's a little bit short of a distance? And yeah, sure. That's fine, right? Go ahead. You can walk across my property anytime you want. Okay? That's also a license. And you're allowed to do that. You can give someone oral permission to cross your land. Okay? But all of the permissions I've discussed so far are temporary, right? They're revocable at any point, right? If you bring a plumber into your property and finishes fixing the toilet, he can't come back. He did his job, he's done. If you allow your neighbor to cross your lawn to get to the road, and you say, never mind, you can't do it anymore, they can't do it anymore, because that's a trespass. If you give someone permission, can they gain it through what's called prescription, which is like adverse possession? The answer is no, because it's not hostile. There's no adversity. So when you have these sorts of temporary permissions, things are sort of in flux, right? There's no actual change in legal relationships. But our next topic is a little bit different. Our next topic is what's called an easement. Easement. I can't spell it. E-A-S-E-M-E-N-T. Easement. An easement's different because it's not a temporary permission. An easement is not some sort of just, thing you do because you're a nice guy. An easement is an actual bundle in the stick. It's a stick in the bundle. It's a property interest, right? You can inherit an easement, right? You can convey an easement, right? An easement cannot be revoked. It's a permanent stick on the bundle. I think you'll remember last semester I talked about Rockefeller Center in New York City, where there's a part of Rockefeller Center that they shut down every year for a day. Okay? Why do they shut down this part of Rockefeller Center for a day? To prevent someone from having a claim for prescription. Let's say someone walks across Rockefeller Center every single day for a decade in New York. They could actually assert a claim to Rockefeller Center. They would actually have what's called a prescriptive easement. Right? A prescriptive easement. Once you have a prescriptive easement in Rockefeller Center, it's as if you take that stick out of the bundle. It's yours permanently. And you could sell it. You can do whatever you want with it. All right? Everyone with me? Right? So easements are very significant. An easement allows a person to use someone else's land. All right? Everyone with me so far? All right, now, the topic we begin today has a word for it. The word is servitude. I'll put in the chat, servitude. It's a big word that I will probably never use ever again. But a servitude is a type of restriction on how land is used. Right? A servitude is like a restriction on how land is used. Last semester we discussed present and future interest. Don't worry, you don't have to remember it for now. A present and future interest describes who owns land at any given point in time. I have it today, my mother has it tomorrow, and if the war is over, if my grandfather gets it. These sorts of questions. Servitudes are different. Servitudes assume that the ownership of the land remains in the same hands, right? But it allows person A to use person B's land. Or it allows person A to control how B uses his land. Right? There are two types of easements. The first is more common. The second is not so common. I'll give the second one first. The less common one is called a negative easement. A negative easement. Okay. Who's next? Is that Paul? Are you next?
Yes, that's me, I think.
Yeah, Paul. Thank you, sir. Oh, Grayson. I'm sorry. I'm looking at my the roster, which is why it doesn't always line up with what's on the Zoom. Grayson, what's a negative easement?
Negative easement. That's an easement that forbids one landowner from doing something on his land that could hurt his neighbors.
Yeah, give me an example of what might be a negative easement, please.
I don't know, maybe if like you're a bunch of farmers and they use your pond to water their cows or something.
Well, just instead of they, let's say you own a piece of land, right? And I own a piece of land.
Mm.
What would a negative easement be in this case?
Maybe there's a road on my land that takes you to your house, but and I let you use it, but then I gate it off. So
No. You're doing positive.
But that's negative for you because you can't get there.
Yeah, but you're giving me a negative easement. If you're giving me a negative easement, what are you doing to your own land?
Am I forbidding myself?
Yes, exactly. Say it again. That's what I was going at. Exactly.
Oh, I don't know an example. I don't know why I would forbid myself from doing something.
Well, that's exactly why it's a negative easement. Let's say you have a factory on your land, Grayson.
Okay.
Can I pay you to stop using your factory?
I guess if you paid me enough.
Yeah.
Probably.
And then what would you give me?
Because I wouldn't use the factory. Okay, that makes sense.
No, say it out loud. So how do I get you to stop using your factory in your land?
Yeah, if you paid me a load of cash.
And then what would you give me then?
I would give you the negative easement.
That's it. There it is. Very good. Okay. See, this happens every year. It's not obvious. A negative easement is where you pay someone else to stop using their land in an injurious fashion, right? A negative easement is when you pay a neighbor to stop using their land in an injurious fashion. Injurious is this fancy word, means it causes injury. That's just the word you use. So let's say Grayson, again, has a factory on his property, and I don't like the factory. And let's say he's not causing a nuisance, right? Let's say he's not unreasonably bothering me, just I don't like it. I can pay Grayson to restrict the land and say, hey, Grayson, stop running your factory. Grayson's like, I'm not going to do it. Okay, how about $1 million? Oh, I like that. Okay, now how do I make sure Paul doesn't back out of it, or Grayson doesn't back out of it? He gives me an easement, and that's now a binding restriction. And if Grayson tries to run his factory again, I can sue him for violating the easement. Right? I can seek damages. So the easement locks him in and prevents him from doing the thing I don't want him to do. That's why a negative easement is powerful. Does that make sense? The negative easement is where someone restricts their own land, usually in exchange for money. Not always, but usually for money. Everyone has a price. I think I said this last class. Everyone has a price. You're idealistic, whatever, but you all have a price. Yes, Grayson, go ahead.
So just to be clear, the negative easement's going to be bad for me all the time.
Well, who's me? Me's the person whose land's being restricted, right? Where you voluntarily agree to limit your own land. That's what a negative easement does. Make sense? Okay, thanks, Grayson. Okay. That's the negative easement. Now, I'll just give you a preview for your notes and make sure you just put a little notation in your outlines. Negative easements are somewhat rare. They're not common. And the reason why is that when you want to limit someone's property in this fashion, you would usually use a covenant. A covenant. You've probably seen all over Houston, deed restricted covenant communities, etc. Usually a covenant is used to impose negative restrictions on your own land, right? For example, I live in a homeowner association, HOA. I have covenants on my land, not easements, right? The covenant says I can only do this, I can't do this, it's all these things you can't do, right? Usually it's thou shalt not, it's a covenant, right? If it's a thou shalt not do X, you're dealing with a covenant. You can use negative easements, they're just not as common. And I can give you the history, but you'll be bored. The book discusses it. It's this long history involving farmers in England. I don't think you care very much, but I can just tell you, as a simple matter, negative easements are less common. More likely you'll see a covenant, restrictive covenant. But you might see them. You're allowed to. You can do that. Okay, doke. Questions on negative easements? All right, next up is Jay, you here?
Yes, I'm here, right here.
Yep, thanks, Jay. All right, let's try the other kind. What is a positive easement?
So with affirmative.
I'm sorry. Yeah, you'll see affirmative or positive. You'll see both. So just, Jay, just 1 second. What drives people nuts is there's different words for everything in this topic. So you might see, the word estate. You might see tenement. You might see affirmative. You might see positive. They're just different words. So just you have to sort of go with it. I'm sorry. All right, go ahead, Jay.
You're fine. So in contrast from the negative easements, with the affirmative easement, the person receiving the easement gets to now do something on the neighbor's land.
Good. So give me an example. I own land. You own land, right? What would an affirmative easement look like?
So if you gave me an affirmative easement to place my trailer on your property.
Perfect, right? I, Josh, am giving Jay an affirmative easement to use my property, Blackacre, right? So he says use a trailer, or maybe it's a common example where you cross a road, or maybe there's some water on my property, or maybe, there's like some grass so my animals can graze. The farmer stuff was very big back then, okay? But the key point is with a positive or affirmative easement, I am giving someone else the right to use my land. Again, a negative easement, I'm restricting my own land. With an affirmative easement, I'm giving someone else the right to use my land. And just keep the terminology straight because people get them mixed up consistently. Affirmative covenants are rare. You know how I said usually if it's negative, you use a covenant? Affirmative covenants are more rare. It's usually used an easement for positive or affirmative. So if you want to keep it straight for your notes, if it's negative or restrictive, it's probably a covenant. And if it's affirmative or positive, it's probably an easement. This is not 100%, but this will get you 90% of the way there, which is almost law students actually want to know. I know how this works, right? 90% is good enough for most law students, which I agree with myself. 100% is overrated. Getting things absolutely perfect often creates more complexity than it's worth. Okie doke. So questions on the difference between affirmative and negative easements. Okay. We will come back to covenants in a week or so. Don't worry about profits. I've never seen one in my entire life. They're just not very common. People don't go picking up lumber in the woods. Just it doesn't happen. So I would not bother yourself too much with the profits. It doesn't come up, and I don't bother mentioning it anymore. Okay. All right. So we'll do covenants next week, but for today, all we're doing is easements. Okie doke. Any questions on the easements, affirmative versus negative? No? Okay, let's move on then. Let's try another poll question. This one should be a short answer. And I want you to start thinking about the different kinds of easements. So question number 4. What is an easement in gross? Defining it is going to be not as easy as you think it is. It is, okay? Okay. What is an easement in gross? All right, next up is Naveen, are you here?
Yes, I am.
All right, sir, could you please give me your definition of an easement in gross?
So I put someone who kind of benefits personally from the easement, so a right is given without caring for ownership.
Okay, what do you mean a benefit is given? Let's just be very precise here. What do you mean by that? I think you're on the right track, but I just want to get your terminology straight.
Yeah, I'm thinking like the benefit is that there's someone who uses the easement in a way that
Okay.
the law kind of prescribes it to them.
Okay.
It's kind of what my thinking was.
Good. So the benefit's given, right? Who is the benefit given to?
Given to.
What's the key defining feature of the easement in gross? Who is the benefit given to?
It doesn't matter about the ownership, so it's just the one who's using it. I think that's kind of my.
You're really close. So Naveen, let me ask this question, please. If I am writing an easement in gross, and I want to give you, Naveen, an easement in gross, what am I going to write on the deed? Who is benefiting from this? What do I write there?
You would be writing that I would be benefiting from the easement.
Your name. I would write your name on the deed?
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Okay, perfect. That's what I'm looking for. Thanks so much. Okay. The very definition of an easement in gross is that the benefit, right, the affirmative easement, if you will, benefits a particular person. Josh, Grayson, Jay, Naveen, whoever it is, right? You know it's an easement in gross if you look at the deed and a person's named. This is the trick for the exam or any test you ever take, right? If I put a person's name there, Bill, Sally, Harry, whatever, right? It's an easement in gross. It's clear that the easement in gross benefits that particular person, right? Because that person is named. Everyone understand that, right? Because that person's named, you know it's an easement in gross. All right. Sarah, you here?
I'm here.
Oh, I'm sorry. Allison, your hand's up first. I'll come back to Sarah in a minute.
Yes. So what does a normal easement say if it doesn't name?
I'll get there in 2 minutes.
Okay.
I'll do the other one. I promise. So Sarah, let me ask this question, right? With an easement in gross, right? Let's just say I gave Naveen easement in gross, right? And let's say he moves and he leaves Houston, doesn't own any property here. Does he still benefit from that easement? With an easement in gross?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Let's say that Naveen has a property here in Houston, and I give him an easement in gross. He sells that property, he moves away, lives on the other side of the world. Can he still rely on the easement to come onto my land?
Yes.
You sure?
No. But I would say so because the easement is specifically for him. I don't think it matters where he lives.
Exactly right. And one more follow-up, Sarah. Can Naveen sell the easement in gross to a third party?
No.
Ooh. Sure about that?
No.
All right. Well, you got 1 for 2. The first one was right. No matter where a person moves with an easement in gross, it follows him. But very often you can sell or alienate an easement. The rules are tricky, so I'm not going to go into specifics now. But an easement in gross is much easier to sell because it's not tied to a piece of land. Okay, come with me. The easement in gross is in some regards easier and in some regards more difficult because it's easy in that it's for a specific person, but it's harder because it's a little bit trickier to convey. We'll get to that later. All right, Clay, you here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Clay. Actually, I'll come back to Clay in a minute. Let's try now the second one, the second poll, question number 5 in the poll. And Clay, you're up next. What is an easement appurtenant? I've heard it pronounced appurtenant and appurtenant. I say appurtenant. I might be wrong. I prefer that, but however you say it, I really don't care. Okay, what is an easement appurtenant? Okay. Okay, another 15 seconds. All right. All right, Clay. Reef won't let me answer this one. I'm sorry if you can't answer that. Whatever. People putting chat to me. Okay, Clay, what's your answer here?
I also one of those people who was unable to type.
Well, then you have the golden opportunity because you have the floor, my friend. What's you can say it out loud and we can all hear it.
It gives that right to whomever owns a parcel of land that the easement benefits.
Yeah. So again, what is the benefit with an easement appurtenant, right? Who gets the benefit?
So the person who the road's like is on. Am I reading that right?
Is the easement appurtenant benefiting a person? Is that your answer?
Or so it doesn't necessarily have to be a person, it's whoever owns the land, I guess.
Ah, so let's say that you own Blackacre today and you sell it to me tomorrow. Can I then benefit from the easement appurtenant?
If I convey it to you.
All right. Okay. Take a look at the if you go to the case summary for the Willard case. I won't do screen sharing because I hate screen sharing. Thank you, Clay. But I want to just walk you all through this. These concepts are not clear, and I tried as best as I can to create hypotheticals to illustrate these principles, right? So let's just have two pieces of property. Make it easier. You have wet acre, which has a lake, and you have dry acre, which has no water. Okay? Diane owns both properties. Okay. Now, what happens if Diane sells wet acre to Walter? At that point, she doesn't own wet acre anymore, and she can't go there to collect water. That would be a trespass. She can't do that. So Diane decides that she wants to continue having access to wet acre. How can she do this? She can do it by creating what's called an easement, right? An easement. Easements must be in writing. They can't be oral. And they must comply with the statute of frauds. Keep that in mind. On an exam, if there's something called an oral easement, it's not valid. It might be a license, but it's not an easement. All right? So how does an easement actually work? There's something called a reservation, right? So here's how it works. Diane sells wet acre to Walter, right? But she does not give him the full bundle of sticks. She keeps one of the sticks in the bundle. She reserves it for herself. And that stick is the right to cross onto wet acre to collect water. Excuse me. Okay, Diane reserves an easement for her own benefit to cross into wet acre. Okay? Now she can reserve the easement in one of two ways, which we've discussed. The first one was the easement in gross. The easement in gross would say that Diane, who would name her in the easement, can cross into wet acre. That easement benefits only Diane. No matter which property she owns, she can still benefit from it. Diane may be able to sell the easement, but it's hers. It doesn't belong to the owner of dry acre. Okay, that's the first one, an easement in gross. The second type of easement is what's known as the easement appurtenant or appurtenant. This reservation is different. If you read the deed, it will not say for the benefit of Diane. It will say for the benefit of the owner of dry acre. For the benefit of the owner of dry acre. Right? That's your tell. If you see a deed that says for the benefit of the owner of Blackacre, you know you're dealing with an easement appurtenant. It's not an easement in gross. Okay? The key factor of the easement appurtenant is that when A sells Blackacre to B, the easement follows. The easement goes with whoever owns the land, right? It's a benefit that follows the land. It's not tied to a specific person. Okay? Everyone with me? Everyone see that? Any questions to that? Yes, Jenny, go ahead. Never mind. You there?
No, sorry. Yeah, technical issues. If the defining feature between appurtenant and engrossed is that appurtenant is not personal and is assigned to the owner of land. In the book, it says that appurtenant easement can be made personal to the owner and not transferable. So if you do that, does that characteristic change the title? I mean,
yeah, those are more rare, right? If you make an easement appurtenant personal to one person and it can't be transferred, it looks a heck of a lot like an easement engrossed.
Right.
Yeah. Let me address that point. The law of easements developed over a very long time. There's many wrinkles. I try to give you the most narrow, common understanding, but there's like a million exceptions to everything. So for your general understanding, the key distinction between the appurtenant and the gross is whether the benefit's personal to an individual or it's tied to the ownership of land. I think that's the good general rule, but there are always exceptions. But I appreciate that you're reading carefully. It's very good. This topic is always tricky because, like future interest, there's always like a million exceptions to everything. Here's the rule, and here's 25 exceptions, which is the world we live in. Okay, everyone with me? All right. There are two other terms that you have to keep in mind when we're talking about easements, right? So we have, of course, easements engrossed and easement appurtenants, right? But then you have these other terms. Dominant tenement, dominant tenement, or servient tenement, right? I'll put it in the chat. You have a dominant tenement and a servient tenement. Autocorrect. Dominant tenement and servient tenement. You will also see dominant estate and servient estate. They're the same thing. The word tenement and estate have the exact same meaning. They're synonymous. All right, dominant tenement and servient tenement. Okay? These words are important. The easier one to remember is the second one, the servient tenement. The servient tenement is this tenement that's serving, right? It's the one that's serving. All right, so called on Clay. Yancy here? Yancy? Marissa you here?
Yes.
Marissa, so in the example I gave you a minute ago with wet acre and dry acre, which one is a servient tenement?
Wet acre.
Okay, tell me why.
Because it's being used for what's on its land.
Yeah, and just say it's serving. I know that it sounds silly, but if you say it's serving, you'll remember it better. Thank you so much, Marissa, right? The serving tenement is one that does the serving, right? It's one that's being burdened, if you will. So in this case, in a hypothetical, it's wet acre. Okay? The dominant tenement's a little bit trickier, right? Marcos, you here? Marcos? Victor?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, Victor. Victor, help us out here. What is a dominant tenement here?
Well, in the example, it would be dry acre, but it would be the land that the person that has the easement owns.
Yeah, you're struggling with the definition, and I know why.
Yeah.
Why are you struggling a bit? I know exactly what's going through your head, but just talk it through.
Well, it just depends, like when it's two, I guess, different properties, and the one has to use.
Let's make it easier, right? Let's say it's an easement appurtenant, right? It's an easement appurtenant where the owner of the owner of dry acre can walk onto wet acre, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that case, what is the dominant tenement in this hypothetical I gave you? The owner of dry acre. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
It would be dry acre.
Okay, why is dry acre the dominant tenement in that hypothetical?
Because the owner is the one that wants the easement into wet acre.
The owner of what? The owner of which one?
Of dry acre.
Okay, good. Thank you, Victor. Right. With an easement appurtenant, the answer is a little bit easier, right? If the owner of dry acre can cross onto wet acre, then the dominant tenement is dry acre. Please make this very clear in your notes. When I say dominant tenement, I'm asking for a piece of property. I am not asking for a person's name, right? Victor or Josh or Marissa are not dominant tenements. We are people, right? It's a very common mistake I see in the exams. They say, oh yeah, Josh owns dry acre, therefore Josh is a dominant tenement. No, I am not, right? There's no way a person can be a piece of property. Wrong class for this one, right? But a person cannot be an estate. That much I think we can say. All right, everyone with me. Now here's the wrinkle. Victor, I think, gave me the correct answer that if we have an easement appurtenant, dry acre is a dominant estate. Okay, Elisa, are you here?
I'm here.
Okay, Lisa, let's change hypothetical, right? Let's say instead of having an easement appurtenant, we have an easement in gross, right? It's a easement for the benefit of Josh, right? What's the dominant estate with an easement in gross?
You don't have a dominant.
Yes.
You only have like a servient estate.
Bingo. Perfect. Exactly right. Thank you, Lisa. This trips people up every semester without fail. With an easement in gross, there is no dominant estate. With an easement in gross, there is no dominant estate. Let me say that 3 times. With an easement in gross, you have no dominant estate. You only have servient estate. This trips people up every semester, and it's so easy for me to test you on this because it's an easy thing to trip you up on. It's very simple, right? It's easy, and it shows if you know the material. There cannot be a dominant estate for an easement in gross because the easement follows a person and not a piece of property. You cannot have one. So it's this weird situation where we only have a servient estate. That's all you got. All right. Questions on the easement in gross? I'm sorry, on the easement appurtenant and the servient and dominant estates. All right, so let's try to see if we can keep this together in your notes because I know right now some of you are probably freaking out about your outlines. It happens. It happens every single year. We start off with the broad category of easements, right? You know, I know you're going to flow chart. I know you're going to try. Good luck, but you're going to try. You start off with the broad category of easements, right? And then you have these 2 types. You have affirmative easements and you have negative easements. Okay. You also have 2 other types of easements. You have easement in gross and easement appurtenant. An easement in gross can be affirmative or negative. And an easement appurtenant can be affirmative or negative. You see how this gets confusing, right? So your flow chart's going to go like spaghetti. It's going to be all over the place. So that's why I'm saying don't. It's like, I know you're going to try, but it's going to confuse you. Okay, so you have easement as like the umbrella. An easement can be affirmative or negative. You can also have easement in gross, easement appurtenant. An easement in gross can be affirmative or negative, and an easement appurtenant can be affirmative or negative. Okay? When you have an easement appurtenant, you need to be able to identify both the servient and the dominant estate. Right? With an easement appurtenant, you need to be able to identify both the servient and the dominant estate. Both an easement in gross, you only identify the servient estate. There's no dominant estate for servient for easements in gross. Forget that. I know you're going to try and draw this. It's going to look messy. It's just, trust me, this one's not worth it. But I know you're going to try, because I know that's what law students like to do, like flow charts. Whatever helps. Everyone with me so far? All right. Let's go on to the cases. Again, I don't like doing the cases in 20 minutes, but that's the world we live in now with Zoom University. The first case discusses how do you create an easement. The basic rule with easements is they have to be in writing. And they must comply with the statute of frauds. Right? Now, who's next? Chance, there you are. Chance, just refresh your memory for a moment. What are the requirements in this class, at least, to comply with the statute of frauds? What do you need?
An instrument, and it has to state the legal definition, like the legal description of the property.
Good.
It's going to need a date, and price is not included, but there's one more thing I'm missing.
What's the most important point of what's the most important aspect of the statute of frauds? What proves that you're actually dealing with a legit thing?
The signature?
Yes. Who has to sign?
The seller and the buyer, or at least the seller.
Right. Exactly. Okay. When you're dealing with the statute of frauds, okay, when you're dealing with the statute of frauds, you need two signatures, right? You need the signatures of the parties who are bound, right? Of the parties who are bound. That becomes very important with an easement, right? Because there's a dominant tenement and a servient tenement. The servient tenement is bound to benefit the dominant tenement, right? So you need the signature of the owner of the servient tenement, and you need the signature of the owner of the dominant tenement. Why are these signatures so important? Because it puts future buyers on notice. If I am doing a title search of Blackacre and I'm buying Blackacre from Bill, I'm going to look for all the recorded instruments that Bill has signed. And if I see that Bill's name is on this document, there's an easement on Blackacre. Maybe I shouldn't be so quick to buy Blackacre with an easement on. I don't want this other guy coming across. So the signatures are really important. They perform a function that's not, you're preventing fraud, sure, but you're ensuring that other people will notice because you have the person's name right in the paper, right? It says, Bill put a easement on Blackacre. Maybe I should not buy Blackacre because I don't want this guy walking across my property, right? That was a common law rule. But then we have California, right? The common law rule was you had to have an easement created between A and B, between the grantor and the grantee. The common law rule says you could not create an easement for the benefit of a third party. Why? Because it's not always obvious who that third party is. And there might be difficulties where you don't find that recorded instrument because you're not searching for that third party. Right? The courts didn't like easements for third parties because it created hassles for recording. It also screwed up with the livery of season. Remember the twiggle? Remember that? You remember that. The twiggling with the little clump of dirt. So at common law, the courts did not like easements for third parties. But of course, our case today is from California. And what did I tell you last semester? I'm never wrong about this. When you have a case in your book from California, they're going to reverse the common law. I swear. I wish I could tell you there's an exception, but it's always the case. So in this case, once again, they reverse the common law rule. Here you had a fact pattern where a woman sold a piece of property to someone else, but she did not give him the full bundle of sticks. She reserved an easement for her church so that members of her church could use Blackacre to park as a parking lot during services. Now, one of the rubs of having a parking lot is you really can't build much else, right? You have to have the land open. Even if people are only parking 1 day a week on Sunday, right? Even if people park only 1 day a week on Sundays, you still need to leave the land open. All right. People always say, "Oh, maybe you can build a billboard or something." Sure, I mean, you can do other things with it, right? But the land is pretty useless. You can't like build a structure on it. But the lawyer for the church took a shortcut. He simply said, "Here's a deed from," her name was McGugan to Peterson, with the benefit for the church, right? This was an easement appurtenant because it benefited whoever was on the church property, right? It wasn't a specific person. It's whoever owns the church. That's who gets it. Under the common law, this type of conveyance was not valid. Under common law, this conveyance was not valid. Why? Because you had to have a grantor-grantee relationship to convey an easement from A to B, from McGugan to Peterson, right? You couldn't give it to a third party. So let's just pause for a minute and just go over this point. Let's say that McGugan wanted to play it by the rules, right? Let's say that McGugan wanted to actually give a easement to the church. Could she have done it? I think, Blake, are you next?
Yes.
Blake, help me out here. How could Miss McGugan, if she really wanted to benefit the church, have done this the right way? What under the common law? Forget California for a minute. Under the common law rule, how could McGugan have actually done this the right way?
She could have done it like Diane did with Wetacre when she sold Wetacre and done an easement appurtenant.
So
reserved a bundle of sticks.
But how? So who would she have had to sell? Who would McGugan have had to sell the parking lot to?
She could have,
without using a third-party easement.
Is an easement an appurtenant a third-party easement?
Well, you're saying she could have sold it. Who would she have sold it to?
She could have sold it to either. She could have sold it to Peterson or Willard, as long as she.
But how do you? But the point is, you can't have the benefit for a third party. How could she have gotten the benefit for the church? What could she have done?
Oh, because she's okay. So the church is the third party.
Yes, the church is the third party. So how could she have given the benefit for the church? What's the right way of doing it?
Oh, that's a good question.
It's an excellent question. That's why I'm asking you.
She owns the two lots.
Good, right?
The church uses the lot.
What's the easiest way, Blake? Forget Peterson for a minute, right? Forget Peterson. Okay. Let's just say Peterson never came into the picture, and the church was using this lot year after year, and the church was worried that maybe one day she might die, and then they'll have a parking lot. What could McGugan have done to help the church out? Forget Peterson.
Oh, she could have given the church an interest in the land.
What do you call that interest?
Give them a fee simple on the land.
Okay, now, do you think she would actually want to give them the fee simple altogether?
She'd probably want to maintain some sort of interest. She could maintain a life estate for her life and then...
What's the topic for today's class?
Easements.
Okay, so how could you have done this, Blake? You're really close.
She could have conveyed an easement to the church on her property.
Okay, good. That's what I was looking for. Okay. That's mostly correct, but not entirely there. Let me explain why. At common law, you couldn't just sell someone an easement. You couldn't just convey an easement in the abstract. He had to do what Diane did. McGugan could have sold a fee simple to the church. Okay? She could have sold this fee simple to the church. But here's the rub. The church would sell it back to her with an easement attached to it. I said again. McGugan could have sold the lot to the church in fee simple. Then the church sells it back to McGugan with an easement reserved for the church's benefit. Everyone see that? In other words, the way to add the easement was through a property transaction. McGugan sells in fee simple to the church, and the church sells it back to McGugan with an easement on it. Now, McGugan has it with an easement stuck on it. McGugan can then sell it to Peterson, but the easement for the church remains. Blake, you see that now? It's a 3-step process, right? Step number 1, McGugan sells it to the church. McGugan sells fee simple to the church. Step number 2, the church gives a fee simple to Peterson with an easement reserved. And then step 3, McGugan sells the land to Peterson with the easement on it.
So is that essentially kind of one of the wraparounds that they were talking about?
Exactly.
In the they keep referencing.
Exactly right. Yeah, they don't spell this one out clearly, but that's what's going on. Right? This is like a 3-step process, right? Now there's a risk. Let's be clear. Right? What's the risk? Once McGugan sells Blackacre to the church, they could be like, "Ha! Screw you, we're done. Nice knowing you. See you in hell." Oh, no, wrong one. It's too damn bad, right? It's too bad. Once you give someone a fee simple, it's theirs. They're not obligated to sell it back to you. So this is a risky move. So I think McGugan's like, okay, let's do this a safe way. Let me just sell this to Peterson with the easement for the third party, right? They tried to skip a few steps. Under the common law, you cannot skip these steps. But we're in California. California reverses the common law and says you can skip those steps. Those steps are a waste of time. Cut to the chase and simply reserve the easement. Everyone see this? This 3-step process is what's called a straw purchase. You ever hear the phrase a straw man? Right? Sometimes it comes in gun sales where, let's say a person's barred from buying a gun and he sends his friend to the store to buy the gun and he buys a gun from his friend, right? It's straw purchase. Think of like a scarecrow, a straw man. You're basically using the church as like a placeholder. It only holds the property for a short time needed to put the easement on the property, right? The church only gets it to put the easement on it. Now, this doesn't have to be done with the church. Very often, a lawyer will arrange this and make his secretary the straw, right? In other words, you convey the property to a secretary for some temporary purpose, and this secretary conveys it right back with an easement on it. Presumably, the secretary is trustworthy. Who knows, right? Maybe they'll run away with it, but probably not. But long ago, people figured out ways around this rule, this third-party rule. And California's like, oh, let's just cut to the chase, right? We know what's going on here. Don't make people waste their time with these straw purchases. Just let them convey the interest of the third party. And that's the rule in California. I don't know that this is the majority rule. The book sort of suggests maybe. I don't think you need to know exactly, but this is definitely a reversal of the common law rule. The reason why I'm not so concerned is in any jurisdiction, you can bypass this pretty easily with a straw purchase. It's not it's risky, but you can do it safely. Right? You don't give it to a third random person on the street. Okie doke. All right. So in this case, in the Willard case, the court held that the easement reserved for the third party is valid. Therefore, Willard acquired the land subject to the easement of the church. Chance, go ahead.
So, in this process, there has to be a land transaction. But if you had, like, say, property out in West Texas and you wanted to sell your mineral rights, how do you differentiate an easement? I guess one, can you just sell an easement without doing a property transaction? Is like, hey, you know what? I don't need. I know it starts crossing over to license and all that stuff, but can you just sell a permanent easement without doing a real estate transaction?
I'm going to avoid answering your question because the answer is it depends. At common law, the answer was no, but under the modern rule, there's some cases where you can. I don't want you to get bogged down in that. Just for our purposes, generally speaking, easements are created through the conveyance of property. That's the common law rule. If I tell you you're in a modern jurisdiction, you don't have to assume that, but at common law, you had to have the easement with the transaction. But licenses in minerals are sort of different. They're not considered easements like crossing onto land. They're called royalties. And royalties are considered a totally different species of property. So don't get too bogged down in mineral rights. It's a different thing altogether. Okay? Okay. All right, questions on the Willard case, right? There's a lot of discussion of why California hates old feudalism, whatever. I don't need to teach you stare decisis in this class. It's not important to me, but the key point to remember is you were able to get around this old rule by the straw transaction. It didn't actually stop you, just to create more work. Here, I think just a lawyer for the church just didn't do the right thing. Elias, go ahead.
So, the whole purpose behind this straw transaction is so that in the grantor index, there's like a record of it swapping both ways.
It's clean, yeah.
Why wouldn't the grantor index just encompass any transaction by the grantor, including an easement?
It would, but just keep in mind in this case, when Peterson sold the deed to Willard, that deed did not reflect the easement. Right? So it makes it harder for Willard to know that there was an easement for the church. Right? I see your question. When you have multiple parties, there's more likely to be a gap in the link. Whereas if you have each incremental transaction recorded, you can piece it together very cleanly. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions on the first case, Willard? All right. Let's do the second case, Hallbrook versus Taylor from Kentucky. I mentioned earlier that you have easements and you have licenses. A license is sort of like an easement in that you're giving someone permission to use your land. But by definition, a license is temporary. A license is temporary. It can be revoked. It's revocable. Revocable, right? It can be revoked at any time. It's sort of like an invitee that you might remember from torts. It's the same idea. So again, as a general matter, a license can be revoked. Except for our dear old friend estoppel. Yes, estoppel comes up in every class, doesn't it? Estoppel. Estoppel is this broad umbrella term that means fairness. Fairness, that's, summarized in one word, fairness. In a case where it would be unfair to cancel the license, the courts will actually treat the license as if it were an easement. That's a pretty big deal, right? If you give someone oral permission to come across your land, and 20 years later the court transforms that oral permission into basically an easement, you've just given up a stick in your bundle, right? So this Kentucky case illustrates some of the things to think about when you want to consider if a license becomes an easement. Now, it's not actually an easement, and don't think it literally is. There's no writing, there's no statute of frauds complied with, but the courts will enforce it as if the license were an easement. Now, I'll give you an easy thing to think about. In this case, there was a road that was built, and one neighbor allowed another neighbor to use it for 20 years. And the neighbor made improvements upon it. He built upon it. He used it to develop his house. He put a lot of work into this road. He put gravel down. And then they had a dispute at some point. The facts are actually are not even clear. In this case, the neighbor put up a steel cable across the road, a steel cable. Let me tell you, when you put up a steel cable, you're going to lose. This is what's called a spite fence. A spite fence. In any case where someone puts up a fence, they're going to lose. It happens. Remember Von Valkenburg v. Lutz? They built a fence around the yard in upstate New York. In any case where one party builds a fence, they're going to lose because courts think that's being a jerk, right? You know, this person relied on the road. He was sort of landlocked. He couldn't use anything else. Don't build a wall. Don't build a fence. Don't put up a cable. You're going to lose your case. Take for that what you will. All right? But in this case, I think the equities were in favor of Taylor. He had invested money in the road. He made improvements upon it. He relied on it for 20 years. This is a very good case for estoppel. And because of estoppel, the court said that the easement cannot be revoked. It is permanent. Okay. So in the end, Taylor had a permanent property interest over the road. How long does it last for? The book says it's actually not entirely clear. What happens if Taylor dies? Can it be inherited? The courts differ on how long these irrevocable licenses last, but they last, I think, at least for the life of Taylor, maybe even longer. So I guess the long and short of it is don't be nice, right? If you want to let someone use your road, you have to be aware you might lose it. You can lose it with adverse possession if there's hostility. And even if you're not hostile, you give permission, you can lose it through estoppel. So I guess the lesson of today's class is don't be nice because you get screwed in the end or something like that. Okay. Questions on Hallberg v. Taylor and licenses? All right. Let me wrap up and I'll start the minute poll so you can put your answers in. From today's class, we have to start keeping our terminologies in mind. We start with umbrella. The umbrella term, we have easements. An easement can be affirmative or negative. An affirmative easement is letting someone do something to your land. And a negative easement is telling someone they cannot use your land. And within those categories, it can be in gross or appurtenant. An easement in gross is where the benefit is for a specific person. An easement appurtenant is where the benefit is for the owner of a piece of land. Any questions on that? All right, we'll be back here at office hours around 12:30. Thank you all so much. I'll talk to you soon.